In Hong Kong, fame doesn't always look like red carpets or leading roles. Sometimes it looks like a face you've seen hundreds of times, a presence so familiar it blends into the background of your memory. That was the career of Elaine Jin. Not a headline star, not a scandal magnet, but a woman whose image quietly held together decades of film and television. She played the roles that made stories believable: the wife, the mother, the neighbor, the woman who was always there. And for a long time, that was enough. Or at least it looked like it was. But recognition is not the same as protection. While audiences felt they knew her, the industry treated her as replaceable. No long-term security, no safety net, no promise that loyalty and consistency would ever be repaid. As years passed, the pressure moved off-screen, into a private life strained by unstable work, emotional exhaustion, and a system that never slowed down long enough to care. What happens when a career built on being dependable gives you nothing to depend on in return? There was no explosive scandal to mark her decline, no dramatic fall from grace, just a gradual narrowing of opportunities, a quiet erosion of visibility, and finally, silence. The calls stopped, the roles disappeared, and the woman who had helped define Hong Kong's everyday screen life faded into a private existence few people noticed. This is not a story about failure. It's a story about how the industry treats those who do the most work without ever being called important. Elaine Jin's life reveals a side of fame rarely discussed: the quiet tragedy of supporting stars who build an industry's legacy, only to grow old outside of its memory. Before conversations about collapse, disappearance, or old age ever entered the picture, Elaine Jin occupied one of the most unusual positions in Hong Kong's entertainment industry. She was everywhere, and yet nowhere at the same time. From film to television, across decades of programming, her face became part of the city's visual language. Audiences might not have remembered her name, but they remembered her presence instinctively, the way one recognizes a familiar street without knowing when they first walked it. She was the dependable constant in a system built on speed, the supporting role that grounded scenes, stabilized narratives, and gave emotional weight to stories centered on others. In an industry obsessed with stars, Elaine Jin represented something quieter but essential: continuity. Producers relied on her because she delivered without drama. Directors trusted her because she required no hand-holding. She was cast not for spectacle, but for credibility. And that reliability became both her greatest asset and her invisible cage. How do you measure success when your value lies in never standing out too much? Unlike leading actresses, she was not protected by brand power or public obsession. Unlike newcomers, she was not marketed as potential. Her career existed in the space between productive, constant, and fundamentally expendable. Every role she took reinforced the same expectation. She would show up, perform flawlessly, and step aside when the scene demanded focus elsewhere. Over time, this pattern hardened into identity. Elaine Jin was not seen as someone building toward something. She was seen as someone who simply fit. That perception mattered. It shaped the kinds of contracts she received, the absence of long-term planning around her career, and the unspoken assumption that she would always be available, always grateful, always replaceable. In Hong Kong, supporting actors are praised privately and forgotten publicly. Their contributions absorbed into the success of others without ever being accounted for. Elaine Jin's ubiquity masked her vulnerability. Because she was always present, no one asked what would happen if she ever wasn't. Because she worked consistently, no one questioned whether consistency provided security. What happens to people whose careers are built on being useful rather than valued? Her early years set the tone for everything that followed: recognition without leverage, visibility without protection, and a professional identity defined by service rather than authorship. While stars negotiated futures, Elaine Jin maintained the present. While headlines celebrated breakthroughs, she sustained the everyday machinery of storytelling. And in an industry that remembers peaks but forgets foundations, that distinction would later prove devastating. What looked like stability was, in truth, a role with no exit strategy. As the years passed, Elaine Jin learned a lesson the Hong Kong entertainment industry rarely explains to the people who keep it running. Visibility does not equal safety. She worked constantly, moving from project to project, appearing in films and television with a consistency that suggested stability. Yet behind that rhythm was a fragile reality shaped by short-term contracts, irregular income, and the absence of any real protection. Supporting actors were expected to be flexible, available, and inexpensive, and the system rewarded those qualities with more work, not with security. Every role paid the bills for now, but none promised anything later. What does fame mean when it cannot be saved, invested, or relied upon? While lead stars negotiated long-term deals, endorsements, and public leverage, Elaine Jin's career operated on trust and necessity. She was hired because she was dependable, but dependability itself was never compensated with planning. The industry assumed she would adapt endlessly, absorbing schedule changes, late calls, and shrinking budgets without complaint, because there was always someone else willing to take the same role if she hesitated. This imbalance spilled into her personal life, where irregular hours and emotional exhaustion made stability difficult to maintain. Relationships bent under the strain of constant availability to work that offered no guarantees in return. The contradiction was cruel. The more she worked, the less control she had over her own time, and the less room there was to build a private life that did not revolve around waiting for the next call. How long can a life stay balanced when work offers no floor beneath it? The industry treated supporting actors as interchangeable parts, assuming continuity without considering longevity. There were no pensions, no structured transitions for aging performers, no acknowledgement that decades of contribution created obligation. Elaine Jin's familiarity on screen gave audiences comfort, but it gave her no leverage off screen. Even success became a trap. Because she was always cast, there was no moment dramatic enough to force renegotiation of her value. She did not break out, but she also did not fail. She simply kept going, and in doing so, normalized her own invisibility. This is how precarity hides inside productivity. From the outside, her career looked full. From the inside, it was always provisional. The industry praised her work ethic while quietly benefiting from the fact that she had nowhere safer to stand. Over time, that pressure accumulated, not as a single crisis, but as constant uncertainty, shaping decisions about money, family, and the future. Can stability exist in a system designed to avoid responsibility? For Elaine Jin, fame brought recognition, but never insulation. It offered routine without reassurance, and work without a horizon. The longer she stayed indispensable, the clearer it became that indispensability was not power. It was exposure. And exposure, in an industry that plans only for stars, leaves everyone else aging in place, hoping that familiarity will somehow turn into protection before it is too late. Behind the steady rhythm of work, Elaine Jin was carrying a private life that had to bend around an industry that never paused. Supporting roles demanded constant availability, late-night shoots, sudden schedule changes, and long stretches of emotional labor that did not end when the cameras stopped. Over time, that pressure seeped into the most fragile spaces of her life, reshaping relationships that required predictability, presence, and rest, things her career could not reliably provide. This was not the kind of pressure that explodes in a single scandal. It was the slow erosion that comes from always being on call, always negotiating between earning enough and being present enough. How do you protect a relationship when your livelihood depends on never saying no? For Elaine Jin, work was not ambition, it was survival. Turning down roles risked being replaced. Taking them meant absence at home. The imbalance was relentless, and the industry offered no accommodations for the people living inside it. As years passed, the strain accumulated quietly. Missed milestones, shortened conversations, decisions postponed. because the next job might change everything again. Emotional fatigue compounded financial uncertainty, and the boundary between professional obligation and personal sacrifice blurred beyond recognition. In public, she remained the familiar face, reliable, composed, professional. In private, the cost of that reliability mounted. Marriages do not collapse only from betrayal or conflict. They also collapse from prolonged neglect, from two lives moving on parallel tracks that rarely meet. What happens when stability is always promised later, but never arrives? The tragedy here is not sensational. There were no headlines to dissect, no moments for the audience to point to and say this is where it went wrong. Instead, there was a gradual thinning of connection, a sense that life was being lived in fragments dictated by an external schedule. Supporting actors are expected to support not only stories on screen, but the system itself, absorbing inconvenience so productions can run smoothly. That expectation leaves little room for personal repair. When relationships began to fracture, the industry did not notice. It never does. Private collapse is treated as irrelevant as long as the work continues. And Elaine Jin continued to work because stopping was not an option. This is how private life becomes collateral damage, not through dramatic choices, but through a series of reasonable compromises that, taken together, hollow out what they were meant to protect. Is it still a choice if every alternative carries the same risk? Over time, the emotional toll reshaped how she moved through the world. Resilience hardened into isolation. Independence became necessity rather than preference. The quiet end of a marriage did not bring relief or closure. It brought confirmation of what the industry had always implied, that personal cost was an acceptable expense of staying employed. In a system that celebrates sacrifice without acknowledging its consequences, breakdowns are reinterpreted as personal failures rather than predictable outcomes. Elaine Jin's private life did not collapse because she lacked commitment or care. It collapsed because her work demanded a version of commitment that left no surplus for anything else. And by the time the damage was visible, there was no mechanism to slow down, reassess, or recover. The machine kept moving. The roles kept coming. The personal world, unsupported and unseen, absorbed the loss in silence. For Elaine Jin, the turning point did not come with a scandal, a public dispute, or a failed project. It came with something far more common and far more final in Hong Kong's entertainment industry: silence. As the years passed and the industry recalibrated toward younger faces, cheaper contracts, and faster production cycles, the phone began to ring less often. At first, the gaps were small and easy to rationalize. A slower season, a temporary lull, a shift in scheduling. But then the pauses stretched and the pauses turned into absences. There was no meeting to explain the change, no conversation about transition, no acknowledgement of decades spent keeping productions afloat. Supporting actors are not formally dismissed, they are outgrown. The system simply learns how to function without them. What happens to someone whose entire adult life has been structured around being needed when they suddenly are not? Elaine Jin had built her routine, her finances, and her sense of purpose around work that arrived consistently for years. When that consistency vanished, it exposed how little infrastructure existed to catch those who fall out of rotation. There were no pensions, no retraining pathways, no industry outreach for aging performers whose value had been defined by availability rather than brand. The same qualities that once made her indispensable, flexibility, reliability, the absence of ego, now worked against her. Without a headline profile to protect her visibility, she faded quickly from casting lists that prioritized novelty over continuity. This disappearance was not personal, it was procedural. Yet its impact was deeply personal. Days lost their structure. Identity loosened from routine. The sense of self that had been reinforced by constant employment began to drift. Who are you when the role you've played your whole life is no longer required? Unlike stars, who exit with fanfare or negotiated legacies, Supporting actors exit quietly, often without realizing the last call has already happened. One job ends, another fails to materialize, and eventually the absence becomes permanent. In that permanence lies the cruelty of the system. There is no clear ending to mourn, only a gradual realization that the future has already been decided elsewhere. Elaine Jin did not fail to adapt. She was never offered a chance to. The industry did not reject her work. It simply no longer needed her presence. And because there was no conflict, no accusation, and no scandal, there was also no reason for anyone to look back. Silence is efficient because it leaves nothing to argue with. As opportunities dried up, the private losses from earlier years compounded. Financial caution replaced momentum. Social circles shrank as professional networks dissolved. The confidence built on decades of competence had nowhere to land. In Hong Kong, where relevance is measured in current projects, absence is interpreted as obsolescence, regardless of contribution. Elaine Jin's career did not end in disgrace or drama. It ended the way many do in industries that plan only for stars, through neglect. The calls stopped, not because she had done something wrong, but because the system had moved on. And moving on requires forgetting those who made the present possible. What followed for Elaine Jin was not recovery, reinvention, or a late life recognition tour, but something far more understated, a gradual settling into silence. Without announcements or explanations, she stepped into an older age shaped by habits formed over decades of service to an industry that no longer required her presence. There were no comeback offers to decline, no nostalgia-driven revivals to headline, and no institutional effort to preserve or honor the labor she had contributed. Life became smaller, quieter, and more private, not by dramatic choice, but by circumstance. What does aging look like for someone whose value was measured only while they were useful? For supporting actors, retirement is rarely planned. It simply happens when work no longer arrives. Financial caution replaces creative momentum. Days lose the rhythm once provided by call sheets and schedules. Social worlds thin as professional networks dissolve. The transition is subtle enough to appear voluntary from the outside. Yet, it is shaped by an absence of options rather than an abundance of peace. Elaine Jin's later years reflect a reality shared by many who sustained Hong Kong's golden productivity, years without ever becoming indispensable to its mythology. She did not disappear because she sought obscurity. She aged into a system that does not account for aging unless it can be monetized. Public memory favors peaks, not persistence. And the work of supporting actors is designed to blend seamlessly into stories that are later credited to others. Who remembers the people who made continuity possible once continuity is no longer profitable? In stepping away from the spotlight, Elaine Jin did not reject her past. She carried it without audience or applause. The dignity of that choice is quiet and easily overlooked, especially in an industry that equates relevance with visibility. There were no scandals to reframe her image, no controversies to spark retrospective interest. Silence, once again, became the defining condition. But this silence differs from the earlier one. It is not the silence of being ignored while still working, nor the silence imposed when the calls stopped. It is the silence of a life lived after usefulness has expired, where privacy replaces performance and routine replaces recognition. This phase exposes the final imbalance of the system. It extracts decades of reliability and leaves individuals to manage the aftermath alone. Elaine Jin's quiet old age is not tragic because it lacks drama. It is tragic because it reveals how completely an industry can disengage from those who carried it through its most productive years. If a face once held together the everyday fabric of storytelling, does it deserve nothing once it can no longer do so? Her story answers that question without rhetoric. It shows how contribution can be absorbed, normalized, and ultimately forgotten, leaving behind a life that continues modestly and privately, beyond the reach of the memory it helped create. In the end, the tragedy of Elaine Jin is not that she failed, fell, or made the wrong choices. It is that she did everything the system asked of her, and the system had nothing planned for her in return. For decades, her face helped anchor the everyday reality of Hong Kong's film and television, filling the spaces between stars, making stories feel lived in and believable. She was present without demanding attention, dependable without demanding reward. And when that dependability was no longer needed, it was quietly discarded. What does it say about an industry when the people who hold it together are the easiest to forget? Elaine Jin did not vanish because of scandal or controversy. She faded because supporting roles are designed to be invisible once they stop functioning. Her later life, lived away from cameras and headlines, exposes a truth audiences rarely confront. Fame has layers, and only the top layer is protected. Beneath it are countless careers built on consistency rather than spotlight, loyalty rather than leverage. These lives do not end in spectacle. They end in silence. Remembering Elaine Jin is not about elevating her into a belated star. It is about acknowledging the hidden labor that made an entire era of entertainment possible. Her story forces an uncomfortable recognition that the industry remembers peaks, not persistence, and celebrates icons while overlooking foundations. In a system that equates value with visibility, choosing or being forced into quiet living becomes indistinguishable from disappearance. Elaine Jin's life reminds us that some of the most important contributors to cultural memory are the least protected by it. And once the applause moves on, they are left to age with the knowledge that they were always needed, just never important enough to be kept.